Hello YouTube, RJ. Hey, in this video I just wanted to do a explanation on doing firmware updates on your Yaesu equipment. I want to talk about a couple things. One is why you ought to do it, why you shouldn't be afraid to do it, and I'm going to cover all of that. But the first thing I want to do is I'm going to walk through how to update your firmware, and then at the end we're going to talk about why you really need to do this, why you shouldn't be afraid, why it shouldn't be something you're nervous of doing. First thing you're going to need is some SD cards. I'm going to start out, I'm on a 710. Now with a DX10, the card slot's right here in the front end. You don't have to do what I'm fixing to do, but I have the AESS. So I'm going to take the little side speaker up and off. Not difficult at all. Set it out of my way. On the left side of your 710 is your SD card. And I'm going to show you that there's two different ways you can go about this, okay? You have the SD card that you would normally purchase. If you don't have, I recommend you have two cards for this. They don't have to be expensive cards. Now, this is an Ultra I'm fixing to show you. Let me see if I can get it up here and get it where you can see it, where the darn. It's just an SD card. This is a 32 gig. You do not need 32 gigs. You need probably 2 gigs, and you can go up to 32 gigs in this. So you don't need an expensive big card. You don't need an ultra super fast card like for video. Just inexpensive ones will work for this. This is what fits in there. But if you already have the little micro, let me see if I can get this out. If you have the little micro SD cards like this, they come with these little adapters, and you can use this. You put it in and you can use it. In fact, if you notice, I pulled this one out. This is what I've been using. So what I want to do is I want to show you the first thing you really need to do is a backup of your radio. So let's say that this was either a new one of these or it was one of the micros with the adapter, okay? You would put it in your radio, and whenever you put one in the radio, push it in until it snaps and stays in. Notice my radio here is asking me if I want to do setup. And I recommend you always say no. Say, nope, I don't want to do setup. Then you want to go into the menus and go down to extension settings. And this will be for either the 710 or the DX. And go to SD card. When you go to SD card, you've got a bunch of choices here. Okay. One's format. Now I'm not going to format this card because this card is my backup card where I do backup. You can go up to the top of the menu. You can memory list load and memory list save. You want to go ahead and hit done on the save. We don't want to do the loads. We want to do the save. We're backing up. We're saving our settings. So we hit done. It's going to come up and show you what's already there. You just tell it new. It's going to use the date. If you're happy with just using a date as a name, just hit enter. If you want to change it, use the keyboard. I'm happy with that. All I need to know is what date this backup was on, so enter. It's going to process, and it's going to save my memory list on this card. And so if I ever have to totally reset my radio or send it back or it dies or whatever, I can reload it. Now, click to get out. We're also going to go down and do menu save. Menu is all your audio settings and things like that. You want to do a save of it. New. It's exactly the same procedure. I'm going to use the date, enter, let it save. When it's done, click. Okay. Now, if you go to software version, you can see the different versions of your firmware here. Now, if we scroll down, you'll see firmware update and format. Once you've done a format on your new card, not the one you're backing things up on, but the one you're going to back up on, you format it, let it format it, you do these saves, and then what you want to do is back out of this menu. You want to take the card out. This card, whether it's this style or the little adapter one, you're going to put it away as your save, and you're going to take another card, and this is the one that you're going to put the firmware on. So the first thing you should do is put it in. It should be new or a cleared card, or one you don't care if it's got stuff on it, you get rid of it. Put it in. Again, it's going to ask you to do a setup. Tell it no. Go back in your extension settings and go to format down here and hit done. Format the SD card. Okay. Now it's going to format. It's going to take just a minute to do this. I'll probably speed this up. Okay, once your format's completed, click to get out of that screen and take your card out. Now, this is a clean card. This card has nothing on it. So what we want to do is we're going to go over, you won't be able to see this, but I'm going to plug this card into my computer, and it's going to come up and it's got a folder called FT710 on it that it created when it formatted with a bunch of folders. You just leave that alone. And what you do is, I'm going to minimize this. You go to the Yaesu.com, go to products, HF transceivers, choose the FT710. In my case, you would do the DX10 if you had the DX10. And then you see description accessory files, go to files. And then you scroll down and look for firmware updates. And you're going to be looking for the newest firmware updates. Amateur radio FT firmware update. Okay, that looks like the latest firmware update. I'm going to click on it. Okay, you saw it download in here. What we're going to do is we're going to go in. I've already downloaded it once and removed it so I could show you how to do this. We're going to go to the folder where it's at, which is download. And what we want to do is we want to right click on a Windows computer and say extract all. And it tells me it's going to put it in the downloads firmware update. That's fine. Let's extract that. Okay, now in our downloads, we're going to have this FT710 firmware update 202402. What we want to do is we'll open that, find this folder, and we want to copy the SFL files. So I'm going to hit Shift and hit this one to highlight all of those. Right click and say make a copy. And then I'm going to go down to my SD card and open the FT710 folder. Don't click on these folders. You don't want to put them in there. What you want to do is click out in the open, right click and choose paste. This is on a Windows computer. And let it copy those files. The SFL files are your new firmwares. So once you've done that, then you can pull your SD card out. I'm going to eject mine. A lot of people don't, but I do. Eject my card. I'm going to put my card in. It has the new firmware on it. It's going to ask me if I want to update on my radio. I like to say no. I like to go to extensions. Now, under SD card, go to firmware update and hit done. And it'll check the files and it'll come back. And what it'll do is it'll look at them and say, are they newer? In my case, the display is newer. The others are already up to that level. So it's only going to choose this one to install. So what I'll do is hit update. It's going to install that firmware and it's going to totally shut my radio down. You do not want this radio to go off during this time. You don't want to turn it off. You don't want to mess with it till it finishes. It could be bad if you do. So I recommend, if you're updating your radio, if you've got a UPS, one of the little boxes that keeps power going if the power goes off for computers, if you've got a UPS, plug your radio in, even if it's not normally plugged in. I don't normally run mine on a UPS. Pulls a lot of current. Plug it in. You're not transmitting. You're not going to be pulling a lot of power. Just plug it in your UPS. So if the power was to happen for some reason to blink off, your radio won't go off. Now, is it catastrophic if this happens? No. And we'll talk about that in a minute. I'll talk about why you don't need to be afraid to do this. Everybody thinks they're going to brick the radio doing this. Okay, so I'm going to say update. It's going to say, are you sure? Okay. And it's going to start updating my display firmware. And I'll speed through this. Okay, it has finished. Shut my radio off. At this point, I can turn the radio back on. What I'm going to do is, since my firmware is done, I'm going to pull this card out. I can use this card for other things because I only need that card when I'm updating my radio. I'm going to put my backup card, the one I keep in here, on. I'm going to go ahead and put my speaker on. I know that everything is fine. It's going to come up just fine. I'll go ahead and put my little AES speaker back on. Now, if you use your speaker on the other side, you don't have to do this, but it's not a big deal. So let's turn our radio back on. My call still pops up. Everything is still fine. And we're back up and operating. As quick as that, I'd done a firmware. I only had one to update. That was the screen, but I got a chance to show you how to do that. And that's the whole thing. That's the whole process. Let's talk about the topics I want to talk about. And that is, do we need to be afraid of updating our firmware? No, we don't. The reason you don't need to worry about updating your firmware is Yaesu knows what they're doing. They know that if they had a system fraught with peril, that they would end up with radios in mass quantities coming back from failed updates on firmware. So they've spent time to put a lot of fail-safes into the firmware. Updating the firmware is set up in such a way that if something goes wrong, when you turn the radio back on, it'll walk you through redoing it to get the firmware loaded back in. You don't need to be scared to do your firmware. It's going to work. It's going to operate correctly. And if something unforeseen like the power goes off, while your radio won't operate immediately when you're done, you'll have to walk through a set of steps that'll get you back up and going. So don't be afraid to update your firmware. Now, why should you update your firmware? Well, I can tell you that they make massive improvements with these radios with firmware. The DX10 has had a lot of improvements done. The 710 is mind-boggling better now than it was. When I got my radio, it was still on one of the, not even the earliest firmwares, but it was behind in firmware, and things didn't work anything as well as they do now. For example, the DNR on my radio, you could hardly use it. Move 1 or 2 levels up, algorithms up, and everything sounded like it was underwater. It was terrible. I went and updated my firmware, and as soon as I updated my firmware, that's just one example, but instantly I can run up to about, say, 9 or 10 on my radio before things start sounding underwater, and that means I can knock so much noise out using the DNR. It's amazing. The DNR works fantastic on this radio now. There was so many things that improved so drastically with the firmware updates that you shouldn't be operating these radios on old firmware. Now, on the 710 in particular, compared to the DX10, there is no front end. There's no analog front end in this radio. It's a complete software-defined radio. Everything in it is controlled by software. So they can do dramatic changes on this radio with software firmware updates. So make sure to keep your radio up to date. I mean, I don't recommend when a new firmware comes out, immediately run out and put it in. I like to give it a month or so to make sure if any bugs pop up, they can fix it before I use it. But keep your radio up to date. You'll be happier. Things will work better for you. So you can see my memory channels are still there. There's my 75 meter buddies. Everything's working. I haven't lost anything. All my settings are exactly where they were. There's no reason not to update your firmware. Don't be afraid of it. It's this simple. Update your firmware and be happy, guys. Hope this helped somebody. Have a great day. Hope to see you in the next video.